we are developing a sampling plan, and our first step is to define the population of interest. So what is it about this group that identifies them, that distinguishes them? Are you looking for information from a certain geographic area, from a particular city or province or Western Canada, for a particular country? Maybe you want to do a comparison in your study of people who live on the East Coast and the West Coast, or people who live in the US versus Canada. So are you defining your population based on location? Perhaps you are defining your population of interest based on demographics. So if we're looking at marketing research, for example, then is that target market, is that clientele base? What do they have in common? So if we look at our existing customers or the group we want to be our customers, what do they have in common? Do they all have children? Do they all have a certain income level? Do they identify as a certain gender? Are they a certain age group? Do they have a certain type of education? Do they work in a certain field? What is it that unites this particular group that is our customer base? Or if we are doing a study and we are wanting to do medical research, then our population of interest would be individuals who have a particular type of ailment that we think our drug or our treatment might help. So we're defining then based on the fact that they have a certain disease or ailment, or maybe they're more likely to get that particular type of ailment. We could define our population of interest based on things that they do. So we could be looking at people who drink coffee, people who drink lots of coffee, people who buy trucks. We could look at people who utilize counseling services. Our population of interest could be bears in Alberta, and we're going to collect information from a sample of those bears in Alberta. And we want to make sure maybe we get representation from different geographical areas or different types of bears if we're doing a comparison, right? So it depends on who is that group. It does not be people, right? Because it can be research related to animals, research related to plants, research related to events. What do they have in common? And we could look at our population based on awareness. So people who know something about a political party, people who have seen a particular ad campaign. What does this population or group have in common? So we want to make sure that that population of interest, that group we ultimately want this information about or from, is included in whatever research we're doing. And in our last couple videos, we've been talking about surveys. So kind of continuing that discussion is collecting our respondents from our survey. Still haven't figured out, still seeing these thumbs up and I don't know how to get rid of them. All right, so we want to define our population of interest. And one of the ways we can make sure that we have the appropriate population of interest inside our sample is to use our skip and our screens. So remember that a screen makes sure that those who are completing the survey have knowledge about the survey. So notice in this particular question, have you ever been interviewed about any products or advertising in the past 3 months? If you answer yes to number 1, and then we terminate the survey and thank the participant. Okay, so if they've already been interviewed about products or advertisements in the past 3 months, then we don't need to include them in this particular survey, so they're being removed. So that's our screen. And we can also use skips. So as we get to a section of questions that are about a particular topic or theme, we want to make sure that the people who are answering those particular questions are from that population of interest. And so we would say, okay, well, which of the following products, if any, have you used in the past month? If you selected cream rinse conditioner in question 2, then answer question 3. Otherwise, skip to question 4. So here, this question about cream rinse only should really be answered by people who have used a cream rinse. And so we want to make sure that we are representing the cream rinse population of interest when responding to this particular question. So we have our skip and we have our screen, which helps us determine whether or not people should be answering the survey questions, but is really making sure that those who are in our sample represent that population of interest. All right, so we've defined our population of interest. We're making sure that those are the ones who are answering the questions. And then next step we need to do is choose a data collection method. So when we talk about our data collection method, are we going to do a survey? Are we going to do a focus group? Are we going to do interviews? And if we're going to do surveys, for example, is it going to be door to door? Is it going to be mail? Are we going to do mall intercept, executive, online? How are we going to be collecting that particular survey responses? Then the next thing we need to do is identify a sampling frame. So the sampling frame, you'll recall from our previous video, is where you're going to get your sample from. So we have our big population and we want to pull from it a sample. Well, how do you go about getting those individuals from that greater population? So a sampling frame is where your sample comes from. Back when we had phone books, right, we could take every 10th person in the phone book, and the phone book was the sampling frame because it was a list of everybody who was in the population. Perhaps you have a list of employees, perhaps you have a list of clients, perhaps you have a list of people who've shown interest in your organization. So that list then, you could pull from it to be the people to participate in your survey. And perhaps you have a partner organization that has a relationship with these individuals. So if you want to do, research on certain treatments, maybe there's a support group, for example, that is for people with that. And so if they're a partner in your project, they might have a list of members of their organization. And so you could be pulling from that. So where is your sample coming from? That would be the sampling frame. And we talked in terms of bias and error in a previous video about the importance of that sampling frame representing that greater population. So we've defined the population of interest. We've chosen how we're going to pull this information. Maybe it's an online survey. And then we've identified a sampling frame, which is who's the list. Maybe we have a list of email addresses that we can send our survey out to. So then the next piece is going to be the sampling method. And with the sampling method, we need to decide how we're going to pull information from that sampling frame. So if you have a list of all of your customers and their contact information, then how do you decide which ones you're going to contact? Or a list of employees, or you have the phone book. How do you decide which of those individuals get contacted? We talked about the phone book. You could contact every 10th person. That is a decision that is choosing a sampling method. So in our next video, we are going to look at the different types of sampling methods. But just to recap, first we defined the population. We chose a data collection method. We chose a survey, what kind of survey, and then we identified a sampling frame. So how do we get this group, this list of people who could potentially be in the sample? And then our next step is going to be, how are we going to decide from our sampling frame who actually makes it into the sample? So we'll look at that in our next video.